Nancy in Scituate. As a licensed mortgage originator in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, I represent many homeowners with good credit in the excess of 750 FICO scores, equity in their homes and income to support the mortgage, who would like to refinance their loans to the new lower rates offered to homeowners that are facing potential foreclosure. Will they have the benefit of these new lower 30-year fixed rate interest rates projected to be 4.5%?
They should, as I said, and that's one of the good things, the smart things the President did, was to reach out not just to people facing foreclosure, but to others. Now, the question is said they had enough equity. Our understanding is if you have a loan-to-value ratio below 80%, then you shouldn't have trouble getting refinanced. And if people do, we'd like to hear about that. That's why what the President did was to guarantee that Fannie and Freddie would buy up loans for people whose loan-to-value ratio, that's the amount you owe versus the value of your house, between 80 and 105%. So people who have more than 20% equity, who have a steady income, if they're denied, we want to hear about it. If you're in my district, let me know. If not, let Bill Don or Steve Lynch or somebody else know. But the answer is that, and that's one of the things we're going to be insisting that the banks do. I do believe, by the way, that the community banks are ready to do this. Now, part of the problem has been that they have been, as their assets deteriorated, they weren't allowed to lend as much because they can only lend a certain multiple of the assets. That's one of the basic justifications for this TARP program. One of the problems was that under the Bush administration, the first chunk of money went to the biggest banks. We are now pushing them to get more money out to the community banks. The more money the community banks get, the more credit will flow. Now, we get into this argument. Now, one other thing. Some of the community banks have said, okay, but here's the problem. You're telling me to lend, but the regulators are telling me not to shore up my capital base. I've called a hearing in the committee I chair for the next week or the week after, which I call the mixed message hearing. That is, the bankers tell me, you tell me to lend, and they tell me not to. And I'm going to call the bankers and the regulators in there, and this is exactly the point. So I appreciate that question, because I'm going to say, hey, I just got asked, what's the story? And we will keep pushing to get those loans made.
From E. Holt and Cohasset, what will the stress test for banks involve?
Well, a stress test that Tim got to talk about is to take a look at a bank and make reasonable pessimistic assumptions. That's what a stress test is. It says we've had a major stress test. In fact, most banks have been through a stress reality. It wasn't a test. And it will be before deciding whether or not how much money they'll get from the rescue plan, they will test them. Now, it's not clear, to be honest, and he's got to clarify this. He was unfairly good, I think, not giving detail. He made a speech a week ago. He didn't give all the detail. Yesterday, the President gave great detail, but that's the advantage of being the President. You're the Secretary of Treasury, you go out there and don't give all the detail and you get criticized. Then you give the President the plan, he makes a speech, and he's there. That comes with the territory. It is incumbent on Secretary Geico, whom I think very highly, to do that next week, and I believe that he will. The stress test is to figure out what would happen to you if the worst likely situation occurred. It's got to be likely, but you can come up with a stress test that will show that if you make the worst enough, bad enough assumptions, everybody moves under it. The question is this: does the stress test mean that if you don't pass it, you don't get any money? More likely, well, if it really means you're in trouble, but frankly, at that point, it's going to be like, well, let's put it this way. I don't think they're going to deny money to people who would fail the stress test in the worst conditions, because then you're saying, okay, let's act as if the worst conditions are already here. But also, you will have a stress test that will determine how much money people should get. And let me volunteer one thing. And I looked down, and I talked about the community banks as a source. I forgot to mention the credit unions, who have been a terrific source of help. We're working on some stuff now, but it's not like the whole lending system has gone bad. The credit unions, it shows that being steady and solid can pay off some. So the credit unions have been a very important resource for us at this time. Marianne should have mentioned that earlier, but I saw you there now and I wanted to do that.